Hello, everyone out there, and welcome once again to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast. I'm Clark Coffey, and with me, as always, is Mr. Colin McFader.
Hello.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Colin, for being here. As always, I'm excited. We are at episode 40, the big 40. I can't believe we've made it this far. How exciting! But today we're going to be discussing Colin's pick, 1973 film by Robert Altman, The Long Goodbye. This is the first time I've seen the film, Colin. Is your recommendation?
Right, yes, you mentioned, yeah.
I always love it when I'm introduced to a new film. Of course, I'm very familiar with Altman. I've seen many of his films, but I had not seen this one. Somehow just escaped me. So whenever you told me that was the film you wanted to discuss, I was pretty excited. And I have to say, I really enjoyed it. I watched it a couple times, actually. I'm looking forward to discussing it. Let's jump in. I'm curious to know why you picked the film, when you first saw it, what that experience was. Because I have to admit, I was a little bit surprised. Not that I should be, because I always kind of have part of my head. I'm always like, well, Cullen, is in his early 20s. Not to give too much personal information away there about you, Colin.
Someone's going to get my social insurance number.
But it's like, this is a 1973 film. Certainly Altman, of course, is a known entity, a very popular director if you're a film buff. But maybe not so much if you watch Marvel movies, and that's kind of the extent of your film experience. Of course, I know that's not you. But nonetheless, I was surprised to hear this was your pick. So yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience with the film first time around and why you picked it?
Yeah, I first saw this movie, I think, right at the end of high school. And I remember, I don't know, there was something just about it that I really liked. I think back then, which we can definitely get into in more detail later, I was really getting into like PTA and that kind of thing. And so I think that was likely, I don't remember specifically, but I think that was the reason I actually went back and watched this, was just because PTA cites it as one of his favorites.
Right.
And you can really see why.
Now, this film specifically, or just Altman in general?
Altman in general, but also I think he's discussed this film on
specifically
a few different occasions,
and you can see that. You can see the influence, and we'll talk about that later. But
totally, So you can absolutely see the influence. And I think the reason why I liked it was just because it feels very different. It's not by any means like art house or anything like that, but it's like laid back in a weird way. I've heard this movie compared to Chinatown a lot, and which would have been even more relevant had this movie originally, as it was supposed to be set in the 1940s. If it was set then, there would definitely be much more of a through line. But
they kept the car, though. They kept Marlowe's car.
They did keep his car. Yeah.
Which I think is like it's a late 40s, I think, maybe a 48 Lincoln Continental Cabriolet, I think, if that's correct. So they kept the car.
Yeah. But and so I think it was just the way that the movie is, like, the flow and the vibe of the movie just are very different. It's very, like, it doesn't rush through anything. It's not a very long movie. It's only an hour and 53 minutes, I think.
Yeah. It almost has a meandering. It almost has a meandering.
It almost just kind of, like, very much, I think the film itself embodies the character of Marlowe in the way that, like, he often seems very relaxed, very cool, calm, and collected. Almost in some scenes, and I think this is a positive, but I've heard people complaining about this as well. Like, he almost seems like he just doesn't want to be there.
Yeah.
Which I think is hilarious.
He's just kind of floating through. So what did you think on your
really
first?
Feels like that.
So on your first view, did it grab you? Were you?
Yeah, honestly, I mean, this is only the second time I've seen it, I think. And in its entirety, I've watched moments and stuff like that when I teach and stuff.
Sure.
But no, weirdly enough, I don't think I had much of a different reaction this time than I did the first time I watched it. There wasn't really anything new that jumped out at me, not in a negative sense, but in just more in a sense that I felt pretty much on par with what I felt the last time.
Now, let me ask. I was just going to say, let me ask before, not to cut you off there, I'm sorry, but before it kind of, it slips my mind and I forget, I'm curious. So PTA this obviously like a current contemporary filmmaker, so it's clear why you'd be exposed to his films. So you see that this is an inspiration. You go and check it out. I love doing that too. And you like it, but you said just then that you actually use some aspects of this in your teaching. I'm just curious, could you kind of share maybe what is it about this film? Are there some scenes that you share with your students? Are there certain aspects of the film that you kind of use to highlight certain things for your students? I'd just be curious to know a little bit more about that.
Yeah, there's the element of, I think one of the key elements that I've used this movie for is just like the flow of camera work that Altman never likes to keep, and that's again another point that he makes himself, that he never wants to keep the camera still in it. But, and before I even knew that was really an intention of his, I always kind of noticed that, there's so many scenes where you just feel like the scene is moving. It almost feels like montage in a weird way. Like
it's almost it's very organic.
Yeah,
it's very
like everything is constantly flowing forward, but not in a way that makes it feel like it's rushed, but more so that there's this natural kind of ebb and flow to the, I would say even like the first half hour of the movie. It just feels like it's like one thing just flowing into the next, into the next, into the next. And so I think that kind of, at least for me, whenever I've taught, and usually I only keep this kind of for the more like advanced, like older classes, because it's kind of a little bit higher level thing, but it's kind of the marrying of camera work and storytelling in a very fundamental level. Like, so not necessarily in a way that it's like this camera movement is showing us what this character thinks, but rather that the camera movement itself is if you were to shoot this movie a different way, I don't think that it would work. If you kept everything else identically, but if you didn't move the camera, if you just kept it still or just shot it in a different way, it would feel completely different. And so there's definitely a lot in there that I think is necessary in a weird, which I think most things in a movie are usually the choices that are made.
If it's conscious, if it's conscious.
But it's definitely like the way that the camera's moving. The way I think back to the first time you see the little guardhouse guy that does the impressions.
I love that character.
When he's seeing Terry out, when he's kind of like saying goodbye to him right at the beginning, right at the opening montage, and it's like you're pushing in on him and you're zooming in on Terry in the car, and then you're pulling out on the guard again, and then Terry drives away, and it's like the movie is just constantly
recomposing,
feeling like it's moving and that it's there's always like this kinetic flow to it, which I really like. I think that's just something that really caught on to me when I first saw it, and something that I think subconsciously kind of adopted in things that I've made as well. So
sure. Well, I think it is interesting to note, and we're going to touch and expand upon so many more, some of the aspects that you've just talked about more as we go through this. But I think the film really stands out today. Now, when it was made in '73, you and I were just quickly before this podcast, we're kind of reminding ourselves of what films were released, around this film. Where did this film sit? Amongst other films in 1973, and it's like mind-blowing the amount of good films that were released.
Oh, it's insane.
In North America in 1973. I mean, wow. It's like, just as a kind of reminder to people out there to kind of put you back in the context of what kind of films, the studios were releasing in 1973 in North America. I mean, The Sting and The Exorcist were the two most commercially successful films. I think both films are also artistically fantastic films, but you've got Lucas with American Graffiti. You've got Scorsese with Mean Streets. You've got Malick with Badlands. And I mean, you could go on and on and on. But
Serpico,
Serpico with Al Pacino. I mean, it's like mind blowing. I mean, and I always, the '70s is definitely my favorite era for film, and this film was surrounded by a lot of really extraordinary films in 1973. But and maybe that's why it wasn't a huge critical or commercial success. It didn't make its budget. It was
technically a flop.
It didn't make its budget back, and definitely had mixed reviews. And I almost wonder if, that what you just described, that kind of, that organic kind of meandering kind of floaty flow, where and it's not just camera work. You really did touch on something that I think is key. I think a lot of times camera and story are not integrated really well, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just like, well, we're going to put a camera here, and it's kind of arbitrary, and we're going to
scene. Yeah.
it's going to capture what's happening, right? And the camera's not fully utilized as a storytelling device in a lot of film, and especially in a lot of TV, because TV doesn't have the time and it doesn't have the budget, and TV's a writer's medium, and you have a different director every episode in a lot of instances. So I think, unfortunately, we're used to the camera not being a very big part of the storytelling in today's day and age, in my opinion. And I think it's really one of the big difference between true cinema and just kind of like, moving picture storytelling.
Oh, totally. Yeah. It's always been really bizarre to me. And again, it's definitely a style of directing, but it's one of those styles of directing that I've always been a bit confused about, which is the hands off the camera. And I don't mean literally hands off. I don't think that a director.
No, you mean like a laissez-faire attitude. Yes.
But yeah, I know many directors who just don't involve themselves in the movement of the camera or in the framing of a shot at all.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Just, which is, they'll go and work with actors, which is very much important as well. But I've always thought that to me, the big part of being a director is balancing everything.
Of course.
And being able to, and because it's not, I think also I think the biggest mistake, and, not to get into filmmaking 101, but I think a big mistake that a lot of people make when they're trying to make movies is that they compartmentalize. So they go like, okay, now I'm going to go work with the actors, and then I'm going to go work with the camera, and then I'm going to go talk to the art department. And it's like, no, all those things should be happening simultaneously, because they all have to come. Yeah, it's very
and
tough,
let's face
definitely.
it. I mean, it's a real challenge, and I think that's, in most other aspects of our lives, right? We're kind of taught like to compartmentalize things. You handle issue A, and then now you move on to handle issue B. And I think it's a way that a lot of people think, and which is a linear, step by step manner, is the way I think many people. That's kind of the way many people's brains are organized.
Yes,
and I think
if
you happen to have a brain that's organized in a very holistic way, where you see everything as being interconnected.
Look at the bigger picture kind of thing, yeah.
And I think that that's a challenging way to go through life. Not to digress too far into kind of some like philosophy of of thinking or something, but I feel like it can be a challenging way to think, because it can take you a long time to wrap your head around things initially. Because everything is connected to you, so you have to consume so much information. But once you do wrap your head around it, it's like, wow, you've got this extraordinary understanding, and it's deep and interconnected, and you can kind of see all the moving pieces. I think film very much requires that if you really want to maximize the medium's potential for storytelling. But I just wanted to say, I think. This film is a great example of not only does the camera work, not only does the cinematography really support the tone, the vibe, if you will, man.
Which I think is such a
the story.
That more so than I think anything we've done otherwise, like that tone
but so do the performances, especially and specifically Gould's performance. So Elliot Gould plays Philip Marlowe, who's the lead in this film. But we'll get to that a little bit more. But his performance and the cinematography and the way the story is told are so in line with each other. They flow on these parallel lines that just really complement each other, and it's rare to see. I
think it's a testament to Altman's positivity, if that makes sense. That like Altman seemed to be very good friends with most of the people he made this movie with.
Okay.
Or at least got along with them very well. There's not really many stories about fights or anything on the set, even to the point that Sterling Hayden and Elliot Gould's most of their dialogue was ad-libbed, because Sterling Hayden was like stoned the whole time. but Altman loved it. Like, he was completely blown away by the performances.
I know Altman did encourage and did like improvisation, and they would often, actors would in rehearsals would work on improvisations and kind of work things up. So he definitely was open.
Yeah, and in I think almost not necessarily stark contrast, but the way that Sigmund does the lighting in this movie is so super naturalistic. Like you don't get like
it's
even if you look at something like Close Encounters, which I think is another really well shot movie, there's still you still get like when someone's inside, there's a light that is, you know, illuminating them so that you can see their face. Whereas the amount of times in this movie that you're like in a day interior and it's just a bright window behind the actor and you can hardly see the features of their face. Or you know, I'm thinking of the moment too when Marlowe goes in with the guy sitting at the piano playing along, and he's like sitting at that bar making the phone call, and it's like there's almost no light on camera side of his face. It's almost just the entirety of the backlight from the window,
right?
Which I think, I mean, I'm a big fan of that look. The unfortunate thing is that the transfer, I think both me and you saw, is definitely an age transfer. Definitely is not the full potential of what this movie could be, and you can tell that it was done on like a little bit of an older scanner, probably. Again, similarly to when we talked about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, where it's like you probably had it right when things were being sort of transferred. It was probably done because it's very, you know, I think the color timing is off. There's definitely not a depth. There's
it's
definitely
soft.
not.
It's really soft. And again, we talked about.
Areas that are saturated, I think, incorrectly. And,
inconsistent grain and damage and full-on dirt and
lots
damage.
Of dust, lots of hairs,
and even a significant piece of damage that lasts for a good 30 seconds.
The whole shot, that little white.
Yeah. And of course, that has nothing to do with the film. Of course, that's that's not a reflection on the film. Sadly, though, and I feel this is worthy of something like a Criterion Collection release would be fantastic.
Restoration release.
And I hope that they do that, but. I saw this here in the United States on the Criterion streaming service. You, I think, saw it on iTunes. Is that correct?
Yeah, I rented it at the Apple.
You rented
TV
it through iTunes, and it sounds like that there's only this one transfer, sadly. And I don't think that there's any HD or AKA Blu-ray release physical media that's currently in print, if I'm not...
that's widely available, There are some, but they go for like $60-$70. I think the reason that we're pointing this out is just to say that the film is a really beautiful film that deserves...
Don't let the transfer fool you. And hey, if anybody out there listening, it happens to work at Criterion, come on. Get off your butts and make this
and Butch Cassidy, please.
But
I think it's important to mention too, because I think a lot of people are turned off by older movies when they see something and they're like, oh, it's so flat and low contrast. And
why is it so mushy?
The film doesn't look like that. It's just that the transfer looks like that, and it's a shame. It really is something that could, in my opinion, quite easily be done. It's just that as anything demands, is there a market for it?
Is there a market? Yeah. And so. I agree. And I want a little bit of a sidestep here, but I want to mention it before I forget, because it's related. I'm gonna make a stretch here. It's related to the cinematography. It's related to how it looks. I love films where at Los Angeles is a character, and I feel like that's the case in this film to some extent, especially in other eras. So I love that there's like a little bit of a snapshot of LA in the early 70s. I actually lived just across the 101 on North Cahuenga from where Marlowe's apartment actually is in real life, where it was shot on location, which is a really unique space where you've got that elevator that has to kind of take you up the side of the hill, and you've got a series of homes or apartments up there. That's actually a real place, and
it's not a set.
It's not a set, and I think most of this is shot on location, if not all of it. I'm pretty sure this entire film is shot on location in Los Angeles, exteriors, interiors. I didn't see anything that smacked to me of set or anything. But I just love Hollywood in the 70s. Having lived really close to there and having seen some of these places,
the griminess of it
in person, I just love it, man. I mean, look, LA is a place people either love it or hate it. If you are a film fan, and if you ever had any dreams of being in the industry, LA probably holds a really special place in your heart, because everywhere you look there's something about cinema. Some film has been shot practically on every street, on every street corner in the city, and every, so there's just so much lure, so many stories. So just a quick sidestep there. I digress, but
no, but it's definitely, I would say that the city is in a lot of ways like a character in this movie in its own.
Yeah, because the vibe. I mean, I think that even the production design, right? The location, it's just so perfect. You've got this, it's so unique, and it kind of almost takes you into another little world. Marlowe has to kind of go up this elevator. His apartment is pretty unique. It's small. It's got that totally if you've ever lived in an old apartment in LA, so many of these homes were built in like the 20s, 30s, and they're these, little kind of cottagey, bungalowy kind of, it's like that vibe just comes right off of his apartment.
Yes. Yeah.
And you've got his neighbors, which crack me up.
Yes. The yoga ladies.
The women, like the yoga women who are always on like hash brownies or acid or something. It's kind of...
And again, that's what's so, like, I think that even exudes the whole feeling of the movie as well, that like those characters are such a part of the movie without really being a part of the movie. Like that there's not
and
much...
it's accurate. Like, yeah. I mean, maybe not the part...
It's really great set dressing in a way. Like it's
not even it's a part of a whole of kind of communicating a feel but doing it visually.
Yes.
But this is kind of LA. Like if you lived in that area today, you're gonna your neighbors are likely gonna be some really eccentric, unique people. I mean, and this is one of the things that I love about Los Angeles. But this is not Iowa suburbs. This is like Marlowe's attitude towards them, where he's totally nonplussed. I mean, he doesn't even think anything about it. That's like the way you get if you live in LA, because there's like just eccentric people everywhere, which is fantastic. I love it.
What's also interesting to me about this movie is that it, we've talked a lot. We've tried to do, I think, movies that are unique or movies that we love from especially from different eras. And this, to me, I think, perhaps more so than anything else we've done, is a movie I don't think could ever be made today.
Sadly.
I do not think that a movie like this, and again, to kind of bring back PTA, perhaps, I think the closest we've gotten recently was Inherent Vice, which even then is a very different feel to this movie. But
I don't even think Inherent Vice could be made today.
Oh yeah, perhaps not. I mean, perhaps with
not on that
like
budget,
PTA
not on 70 millimeter. I don't think on that budget. I really don't. I think what film did PTA come off of? I'm trying to remember.
I think it was just The Master that he had done.
Okay,
and then he did Inherent Vice, I believe.
Right, and I can't remember how commercially successful The Master was, but I think it did quite well commercially.
The Master was quite, and then Inherent Vice, I don't think was very... Yeah.
So I think, Paul Thomas Anderson coming off of There Will Be Blood and coming off The Master, commercially successful, very successful.
Yeah.
And I think, the studio gave him money for Inherent Vice because of that. But I don't... I almost wonder if you'd have that kind of budget for that film today. Yeah, much less. Yeah. I'm agreeing with you. Much less this film today. And you and I had talked about this, and I think it's an interesting, just not only would this movie be very difficult to make at this budget and be released theatrically, but Elliot Gould as a leading man, I almost wonder if that could happen today.
Yeah, he's in that. I've always, again, said that this, like, there's this kind of, I guess, league of, like, everyman that aren't, supermodels, which is like the Roy Scheiders, the Elliot Goulds, even
which
someone
used to be pretty standard. I mean,
which was a very common thing, and for some reason nowadays you can't. It's like a lost art. Like you can't have your main character not be
Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, all these I don't even know their names. Sorry, like all these Marvel studs who are super ripped and 6% body fat and whatever. It seems like every leading man almost it's like the Tom Cruisification of leading men, where everybody's got to be ripped and buff and beautiful. It seems like. Now, to be fair, we're whining about this, but this is a situation that women have experienced in film
Oh, absolutely.
Since the art form's inception. So here we are whining and moaning about how leading men have to be these extraordinarily externally beautiful creatures. Well, hey, I mean, sadly, that's been the case for women times 10.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, hopefully this will improve somehow for all people. And I personally prefer like unique, eccentric, both externally and internally, performers and performances.
Definitely. Yeah.
So Elliot Gould has such I am not, I want to make sure it's not that I'm not a fan. I just don't know too much about him. Outside of his films with Altman, MASH, and this film, and I think he might have been in one or two others. I mean, honestly, my exposure to him is not that great, but I thought he was fantastic in this film.
Oh, he's great. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things again where it's like you just feel like he landed in this role so perfectly.
Yeah. I love his little asides, and this is a big part too, and we can kind of jump into this. Maybe, who knows, we'll sprinkle it in. But sound design is obviously a huge part of Altman's direction. Yeah. I think that he kind of pioneered to some extent, right? Like some like multi-track audio recording, hiding mics on actors, and running a lot of different tracks at once so that we can record overlapping dialogue but still get it cleanly.
It's super necessary in this, especially considering that like Elliot Gould's half of his lines are delivered like under his breath.
As an aside.
They're super low, yeah.
Right, and and I don't know. I'll ask. Maybe maybe you don't. But I'd be kind of curious if there's any ADR in here, and to what extent there's any ADR. I'm not quite sure.
I'm not sure. Yeah,
I couldn't tell, but I know that.
That's the other shame about this movie is that there's not really a lot of like BTS like features, making ofs.
Criterion.
There's no like supplementary material. Yeah.
Yeah, we need your Criterion. I mean,
yes, please. Yeah.
My hunch is that there probably wouldn't be a lot. From my understanding of how important sound was to Altman, and how I mean, and you and I, and I'm sure you as a teacher, and I've been through this myself, and we talk about this a lot as we kind of share advice and talk to other aspiring filmmakers. How important sound is. And I think every budding filmmaker has a story where, the first project they ever work on, they spend all this time working on the visuals, and you neglect the sound to your own serious detriment. And when you start putting it together, you realize, oh my God, sound is really, 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 really important. I screwed this up.
I mean, again, plaster mics wherever you can, get as much as you can. That is clearly pretty much something that Robert Altman invented, and I think that that's something that has become the norm.
And
get as wide an array of sound and backups of sound, and everything you can just to make it sound very good. Because that's one thing I will say about this movie, even though it does have that very 70s feel of sound where it's like there's a little bit of like kind of a little staticky, and
it's not perfect fidelity, but limitations.
But it does have, again, I think that those exactly were technological limitations of the time, not craft faults of a craft. Exactly. Yeah. And it sounds great. Like I would say, even making that point, that it still sounds
just
really,
imagine
really good.
A nice lossless track, Criterion.
Oh my God.
Wink, nudge, nudge. But yeah, I mean, but that I am not an Altman scholar, but even I know that, especially with MASH and McCabe and Mrs. Miller, with this film, I mean, he really put a lot of time and effort into sound, into how his actors were recorded. And I can only imagine how wonderful that would be. I mean, that if you have ever acted on camera, sound can be a big limiting factor to your performance. If you don't have, now thankfully digital recorders are improving. 32-bit performers where you don't have you don't have as near a big of an issue with clipping, but you've got to be really careful with your voice as an actor on camera. Not that you don't ever have to be. I mean, of course, even on stage you have to be careful with your voice, but the dynamic range is limited to a great extent by the technology of the recording technology that's being used to record you, and so that can be limiting in your performance. So to have a director who's taking that into account, and who's freed you up to be able to use like the full dynamic range of your voice, of your volume, and to not have to worry about just standing in one specific corner so that your, one specific tiny little mark so that your audio can be properly recorded, is really freeing. And I imagine with such a fluid camera, right, with so much recomposition, with so much camera movement, I can't imagine being a boom operator there trying to capture all of this. It just wouldn't work,
No.
So it really frees you up to be able to do that.
And I'm curious, because obviously, wireless labs wouldn't have been a thing at this point. So I'm curious to know if they were miking the actors, it would have likely just had to be wired.
It's a good question,
right?
I would
that would also be another limiting aspect, but perhaps in a weird way a freeing aspect. Like perhaps they just had the cables that were long enough to do that, or something. I don't know. That's also what I mean, where I'm saying like that it would be so nice to be able to see some just supplementary material, even if it's just people talking about.
We'll just imagine it. I just imagine that Elliot Gould had a wired lav like hidden, and he just had like a 30-foot cable that just like ran down his pant leg, and you just have to try.
He'd be pranked. Someone would just pull it sometimes.
But it's a good question. I've only worked with wired lavs myself in an interview. In which situations I prefer them, because I don't want to introduce the risk, the variable of the wireless being interfered. But I've only worked with wireless lavs and of course booms in actual narrative filming situations.
Me as well.
So that'd be interesting. But especially back then with analog recorders, recording multi-track was much more difficult. It was no small task to record good audio back then. No small task. So major innovations from Altman, and really, I think if you're an aspiring filmmaker and sound is an area that you kind of want some inspiration on, I say definitely check out his films, because
I think that the other thing too is that when we say sound design, we're not necessarily talking about like Foley or the creation of like sound effects, like someone if you think of like Blowout with De Palma, where it was like, a revolution in doing like incredible stuff with post sound.
Foley work.
This is just about getting really, really good sound on set.
Correct.
I think I think if you're interested in sound, watch all of that. You should kind of have a wide breadth of it. But it really is, and it's something that is, again, as with anything with sound, you kind of subconsciously notice it. Like it's not like you're sitting there going like, man, the lav work on this is really great, because good sound, you shouldn't really notice it,
right?
But I think that is also one of those things that it does. Like there's few and far between movies from that era that sound this good. Even The Godfather, there's plenty of moments in The Godfather, which was made, The Godfather 2 came out, or Godfather 2 came out after this, and Godfather 1 a year prior,
right?
That there are moments in The Godfather where you can tell that they kind of had to crank some gain to hear the actors, and
little
not
ADR.
That, I think that the Godfather has incredible sound design as well, but you can definitely tell why Altman's method of doing this way became such a standard in the industry, of just like loading up as many mics as you could to make sure that you caught every dynamic sound and every single.
Well, I think it's still better, frankly, than a lot of films, honestly.
Yeah.
Not from like a purely technical perspective, because of course recorders and microphones have come a long way since then. I'm not talking about that, but I mean the artistic intent of how things were recorded. I think
that the director was so involved in it,
and that overlapping audio for which he's so known really is a huge part of this flow that you and I keep coming back to and talking about, which is so indicative of this film and his best films. It's not just the fluid camera, it's not just the performances that are seamless, right? But it's the audio, it's overlapping audio, it's Marlowe talking to himself under his breath, and we can hear it, and it doesn't sound ADR'd or cheesy or kind of plugged in after the fact. It sounds organic, and that takes us from one scene to the other. It's this running commentary that and this inner dialogue that Altman's able to present for our main character, which of course is kind of who we're seeing this whole film from.
Well, you even think about the moment when Marlowe's being interrogated in the police station. It's like you've got two people on one side of the glass having a conversation, then you have Marlowe on the other side of the glass being interrogated, and it's like that conversation, it doesn't ever feel disjointed. It doesn't feel like every moment feels like it's supposed to be there, like it flows.
There's so many more cuts in this film that I felt than I notice, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, there's a couple cuts that, you know, in my opinion, when something's put together pretty well, usually that means you don't notice the cuts. They're not obtrusive, they're not fancy. There's a couple that I feel were a little weird. Let's talk about this a little bit.
Sure. Yeah.
And I understand there's technical limitations. It's almost kind of like a you know, it's like a stunt shot or kind of like a special effects shot. They've got some sugar glass or something, but the cut where the Coke bottle is smashed into this poor woman's face by the mobster guy whose name is escaping me, but the who played that? It was Marty Augustine.
Marty Augustine,
played by Mark Rydell. Who I think did a great job. I want to talk about this a little bit too.
Oh, what a wonderful characterization of that.
Scary, dude, but like scary,
but also like weirdly like again, like you've got this undertone of comedy to it.
Almost really, like this, like mousy, like physically kind of mousy, but also yet still.
And then he's like, you know, let's all take off our clothes.
I
like
know.
This like weird,
Well, I get. Let me I'll finish this thought and let's go into some of that. Yeah. But as my excitement builds, I start to talk about like 4 things at once. But so hang in there, audience. But I felt like a little bit of a jarring cut, a strange kind of like. And I understand it's a technical thing, but when he kind of backhands that Coke bottle into her face, there was kind of a strange kind of like cut to an insert. So obviously they had to kind of set up whatever kind of, you know, effect they had going on there with the prop and whatnot. I felt like that was a little jarring. There was another space too, and it seemed so random. Do you remember where Marlowe's driving in his fancy 40s Lincoln Continental cabriolet, and he's looking for the addresses, and there's like a maid kind of walks by, the camera kind of like
he kind of looks at her,
hangs on the maid, and then there's like a butler guy and almost like a tux jacket. It looks kind of strange, and he's, or not a tux jacket, but like a server jacket, or you know, and he's like sweeping the walkway, and you know, it's kind of like almost our POV is like Marlowe, we're kind of scanning for the addresses, we're kind of looking at the environment. There was a strange cut there that felt abrupt, and I couldn't quite understand exactly why that was done or what was going on. I don't know if any of these stuck out to you, but only a couple. But for the vast majority of the film, I hardly even noticed. It didn't even feel like there was editing going on, which I think is usually a good thing. But what are your thoughts on that, especially the one that was really obvious to me with the Coke bottle?
The Coke bottle was obvious, and I think that. I mean, I think it was likely just the setting up of the blood effects and stuff, and cutting. You know, you had to cut away for that. But I didn't really notice the one about when he's getting to the house.
Yeah.
I would say though that the one earlier thing that you said that was interesting when we were kind of having our little preliminary conversation was about that you almost felt like the opening was like a oneer.
I almost did.
Which I mean, there's cuts in there, but it definitely feels like just more so. I think because of how much stuff is left in. That it's like, you know, he's like lying on his bed. The cat wakes him up. He goes into the kitchen, finds out that the cat's food is empty. Has to go out and get and then he got to talk to the ladies, go down to the thing, and it's like, again, this almost to me this feeling of like montage and I think what a lot of characters, or a lot of directors forget about these days is just like atmosphere. You know, you don't have to constantly be moving something forward.
I love it.
You can allow the audience to just sit in a moment for a bit to breathe and to feel in the atmosphere. And it's like I think more so than anything, that scene just presents the character of Marlowe better than like a monologue ever could.
Thank goodness, and better than any crappy exposition. Better than any. I mean, a couple things too. I want to say, whoever was wrangling that cat. Holy crap.
Oh my gosh.
That's like one of the best cat performances
I was going to say, you don't see a lot of cat performances.
Because you know, unlike most other animals, cats are pretty much untrainable.
Yeah, and you can't train.
And holy crap, I wonder how many takes it took to get, because the cat performed flawlessly.
Well, and it's also, I think, it's like clearly like a kitten. Like a pretty young cat.
I mean, they must have not fed that.
I think that they tend to be, you know, younger cats tend to be much more easy to get to come to you, or with some food, or
maybe. But, I mean, I've got 2 cats, So immediately right off the bat, I'm in love with this film because here's this super cute cat, and if you've ever had cats, this is like what they do. They like jump on you and they wake you up, and it's
they
like
want food.
and they want food.
Really cute cat. Yeah.
It's really cute cat, but I mean, so I kind of joke. I mean, but I do love cats. I'm not joking about that. But I am really impressed actually with how they made that scene work with a cat, because that's not easy, and it seemed like it was specifically choreographed. And that had to have been challenging. Like,
totally, yeah, I can imagine.
But the important part, though, that you just stated, and I totally agree, is that here we are introducing a character, and so many times I think films are they feel forced, they feel rushed, and they feel like they've got to introduce character with dialogue, exposition, kind of explaining to us something, telling us about a character. And I just really enjoy being able to take time, to have space, to actually have the director show me about the character. Mm-hmm. And it's fun too, because he goes into the convenience store, that little like grocery store, and he's looking for his cat food, and it's not there. And he has this interaction with the stalker at the
who comes back briefly later.
So Altman sets that like cute little thing up, and then when Marlowe's in jail being processed, we see that character again, and they have a fun little interaction about the hey, I don't need a cat, I've got a girl.
And he's like, how's your cat, how's your girl? There's the funny part too. I mean, another thing about the intro, actually, that we haven't mentioned yet is, the score, John Williams' score, which is definitely one of, I would say, not lesser known to people who are big into film scores than John Williams, but a lot of people, I would assume, don't know that the guy who did Star Wars, Superman, Indiana Jones, Harry Potter, Jurassic Park also did this, again, relatively low budget movie for the time.
And it's a unique
This was
score.
definitely the sort of the beginning of John Williams' career as well. John Williams had done a few, movies, but John Williams primarily came onto kind of like the world stage as kind of a superstar after Jaws.
Yeah.
But you look at this movie, and it's such a unique score in the way that Altman specifically wanted pretty much every song to be the same, or the same melody, which was the Long Goodbye song, written
title
by
song,
John Williams. And who was the other guy that wrote it? Johnny Mercer.
Yeah.
But that it's like every version of the song is played in a different style. So, but intercut with scenes. So again, going back to the opening scene where you've got Marlowe going down to like get his cat food, that's intercut with his friend coming to see him after killing his wife, and he's got the same song on the radio, but it's in a different style. Like it's a completely different style. It's kind of like more of like a samba, bossa nova almost.
Yep.
And so we've got this like piano jazz as Marlowe goes to the thing, and then there's like the music is playing on the radio in the convenience store in a different style. And so I love that. I love it when things like that are made parts of, like, I think again you've got modern era, and even back then pretty frequently scores were just meant to kind of be background noise that they just filled in the blanks, whereas I think that this to have a director choose to do something really unique and interesting with the score is really cool to me. Like that's a really like neat idea, and again, it just kind of feels like it brings the whole movie together in a way that it almost ties a neat bow around it. And it's one of those things that if it was missing from the movie, the movie wouldn't be altered in a huge way, but because it's there, it just adds this level of detail that I really like.
You mentioned, and I would expand upon, because I think it is so important, that so much of the soundtrack, or so much of the score, the Long Goodbye, like you mentioned, in these different iterations, is presented of it, in the story world. So it's diegetic sound.
Diegetic, yeah.
And it's actually there. We have, and it's done uniquely. Marlowe's at a bar, and we have the piano man at the bar playing it. It's on, the radio in several different instances. We have all these different moments where it's actually the result of an interaction in the story world that the music is presented. So we talk about performances, camera, the sound, as far as like how dialogue's recorded, how the score is presented in the film. All of these things are presented in a way that really does create that all kind of synergetically kind of creates this flow that we keep
to
talking
put
about.
It simply too, there's a through line of choice and intention through the entire movie and every aspect of the movie that you so rarely find. You feel not only Altman's hands in every aspect of the movie, but just that almost like the movie has this almost symbiosis to it, that it's like it's got its own thing, and that so everything that exists in this world feels so perfectly orchestrated for the movie. And I don't mean in a choreographed or set up way, but rather just that it feels like, it almost reminds me of the feeling of kind of like a graphic novel where it's set in, the real world, but there's definitely like there's an interpretation to everything in life. And that's what this movie feels like. Like every person that he interacts with, they don't necessarily act as authentically as real people would, but I kind of like that. Like that there's like a character to everybody. Everybody has this like either this kind of like jaded approach or this really nice. Yeah, exactly.
Even though it's not like sci-fi, it's not Blade Runner. No. We're not off on another planet, but yeah, that there's like that the world that the film creates is a tangible one. It's a subtle one, and it's like a believable one. I want to go back quickly to a couple things performance-wise, and I want to go back to also to that the violence that is in this film, just really quickly, because I don't know about you, but it really stood out to me, and I was kind of shocked, honestly. Not that it's not graphic in like a modern sense where you see like gore or something. But the way that the violence is, what violence there is in this film is presented in a way that really did affect me, and that's where we have Marty Augustine, that character who's it's never really stated exactly. I'm just going to call him like mob guy, but he's got his entourage of henchmen, and he's looking for his $350,000. And of course, he comes to Marlowe to thinking that he's got it or knows where it is. And there's that scene where they come into Marlowe's apartment, and they bring in, or she comes up, this woman that's, I guess, his girlfriend, right? Marty's girlfriend. And the way that he kind of is threatening Marlowe, but talking to her.
Using her
as a proxy for like, I'm not going to hurt you, I'm going to hurt her. But
it's like, this is someone I love.
But he talks
now,
right,
and you see what I do with you.
Yeah, he goes on this monologue about how much she means to him, and how much, which is also kind of funny because it's like, well, I mean, you're not my wife, but I mean, outside of my family, like, you're the most important thing to me. I mean, I'm cheating on my wife.
There's this really funny element to it too. Again, where it's like Marlowe has this. Like there's no, in a very interesting way, the stakes and the violence in this movie are presented, like the violence is super brutal.
He doesn't respond to it,
but he almost is like clearly like it's like this buddy things with all these people who are threatening him. Like he's just kind of like making jokes with them, and there's the one guy that is kind of the youngest of those mob groups, and he's like assigned to follow Marlowe, and Marlowe's kind of helping him out, like, I'm not supposed to see you following me. And there's this and I think that really again to go back to PTA, that's something that is a tone in a lot of PTA movies, this almost really, really black comedy. But where everyone else is kind of, there's also this like almost weird stupidity to it. And I don't mean stupid in the way that it's written or stupid in the way that it's presented, but just that every character almost seems to just be slightly dumb in a really fun way. And but again, that is so juxtaposed against this really this like violent outbreak, and then later on in the film
but the way that sets that up, I mean, that's intense, and it's unfortunate that there's only a few women characters in the film, and sadly they're either kind of presented half naked as Marlowe's neighbors, or have violence committed against them. So that's unfortunate, but then the way Altman sets that scene up, where we have Marty just smash this bottle into her face, and it's really horrific. And you're right, Marlowe does not respond the way you would think most people would respond. He seems pretty nonplussed. But then we come back later, and there's like a replication of the scene. And so we know what happened the first time.
She's in bandages, and
right, and we see kind of this, the results of now she's got all this. She's like, clearly her nose has had to be like fixed, and there's all this bandage all over her face, and now Marty's brings her in again, and he's talking to her again, just the same way that he talked to her before whenever he hit her. And so, at least for me, I don't know about you, but I was just like, the suspense was
tense.
like,
I'm
just like, oh my gosh, don't do it, don't do it, like,
again.
please. Yeah. Now, thankfully, he doesn't. But, oh my gosh. But you're right. And then what he does do is pretty funny. I mean, instead of
Schwarzenegger's there.
We have to give Arnold Schwarzenegger's there. It's I think just real quick, we'll digress. I think you had mentioned that he was in Hercules in New York, where of course he has his voice dubbed out. So he clearly, and he's just an extra here. I don't even know if he's credited. He doesn't have any lines.
He's not credited. Yeah.
And I mean, he was in the middle of his Mr. Olympia win streak. I mean, so in the bodybuilding world, he was like on top. He was numero uno, but he had yet to make his impact in film. So it's definitely funny to see him here, and he gets to take off his clothes.
But that's what I mean, is that it's really weird. Like, you think that oh god, he's gonna hit her again or something like that, or there's gonna be some sort of outburst of violence, and then he's just like, everybody take off your clothes,
and
you're just sort of sitting there like, well,
because it's like that's how we've got to be honest. It's like, I'm vulnerable. If I take off my clothes, then we can be vulnerable and honest. I'm just like, So
again, there's this weird sense of humor that goes under the whole thing. That's very much not necessarily, I think, like if you read the book, I haven't read the book, but I don't think the book is in any way comedic. I think the book's much more
I've not read the book. Yeah.
And whereas
there's a lot of humor.
Yeah, and I think that, again, that comes a lot from, like, you watch something like The Master, which on a whole is not a very funny movie, but you've got these funny little bits, like when Joaquin Phoenix is taking the pictures of the guy and he keeps sliding the light closer to him, and the lights are so hot that the guy's like leaning away from the light, and Joaquin keeps sliding. Things like that are, I think, super Altman-y. Keep very clearly, very much.
I think there's a lot of humor, and I think you talk a little bit about Elliot Gould's Marlowe being kind of detached or being not having a lot of serious reaction to the violence that goes on, to the threats that go on. I mean, and actually, Marlowe actually even ends up killing in cold blood his friend at the end. Spoiler alert, but hey, if you've not seen the film by now, 50 years later, then I think it's okay. But Marlowe actually ends up eventually, he kind of comes to the end of the conclusion of the mystery kind of part of the story, part of the film, and come to find out his friend, who he in the beginning of the film takes to Tijuana, actually ends up kind of he's still alive. He's faked a suicide, and he's actually been cheating with the woman from the other case, Eileen Wade.
But it's all connected,
and it's all connected, and and there's not a whole lot of. It's like, Marlowe pulls out a gun and shoots him, and that after it's confirmed that his friend has done this to him. He doesn't do a lot of thinking.
He's like, I lost my cat. Yeah.
And literally, and the ending, I think, is I actually, it's hard to end a film. There are a lot of great films that it's like the ending just doesn't quite do it justice. Good endings are tough. I think this ending is amazing.
Oh, yeah.
Because not only do we kind of wrap up the whole kind of mystery plot part, we get this, I think it's great, where we have Marlowe kind of walking down this like really long shot, the long lens. He's walking down this beautiful road, and we see Eileen Wade, Nina Van Pallandt's Eileen Wade, driving towards us in a Jeep, and she kind of glances at Marlowe, kind of recognizes him, thinking like, what is he doing here? And then heads on down.
Especially after having ignored him last time they saw each other.
Exactly, because of course we know what's going on. So we know she's getting ready to find that the man that she wanted to escape away to Mexico with is dead. Mm-hmm. And you just have this little moment where Marlowe plays his little harmonica that he got in the hospital and kind of dances.
Again, another comedic moment when he got
and they kind of like dances a little jig with this like random stranger, and then we fade out.
And then Hollywood, whatever it's called, here's to Hollywood or
Hooray for Hollywood.
Hooray for Hollywood. The only other song in the
only other
soundtrack.
song. And I just feel like but what I want to say too is I think the way Marlowe responds to these things is what keeps this film from being melodramatic or too heavy. If Marlowe's response, because we see the film through Marlowe, right? If Marlowe's response were to be, oh my gosh, this is horrible, or if he were to be in fear, if he were to be, because in reality, likely you'd be pretty terrified if you had a mob boss coming after you for $350,000, which back then was probably $5 million. If your friend that you just helped out to go to Mexico was found dead, if all these things were actually happening, if you witnessed a woman have her face, destroyed by someone hitting her with a bottle, I mean, your response would be substantially different.
Mm-hmm. But then that's what I mean when it's like there's this world building and tone building.
Yeah. And so that helps keep the tone of this film light in a sense, even though it's a neo-noir. It's not a true noir. It's not heavy like a noir. It's not hard-boiled and heavy.
Yeah, you don't come out of it thinking like, man, that was depressing or something. Yeah.
No, it really has a lot more comedy into it.
And again, you can also, for another contemporary artist, you can really see Altman's influence on like the Coens. Like where
sure.
The Coens love that. Like Fargo is arguably a story that's about like a really tragic series of events that's hilarious. Like Fargo's a really, really funny movie.
Coens do that all the time. Yeah, dark comedy. It's like crime, people dying, but it's hysterical.
Yeah. And I love that style of like not overt comedy, but just that everything is played up a little bit like silly in a way.
Yeah, well, it's like the absurdity of life. And not that I'm sure we'll do a Coens film, but but yeah, there is definitely an absurdity of life that I think it captures. And look, real life can be pretty damn serious, but a lot of times in those most tragic, serious moments when life seems as surreal as it can get, there is some kind of sliver of strange comedy in that. So
if you don't laugh, you cry.
If you don't laugh, you cry. Well, on that note, I think we can wrap this one up. Cullen, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate you picking this film. I really enjoyed watching it, and I have enjoyed discussing it with you. And I hope I hope that those listening out there also enjoyed our discussion of it. I'll be excited to see. Ooh, it's my turn, isn't it? It's my turn for the next. Yeah. Ooh, I've got some homework to do then. I better think of something. I'm scared because there's a part of me that, I don't know about you. Just for a quick second, let me take a quick moment here. I love so many different types of film, Cullen. And, I feel like films and cars, my attitude toward them are the same. I love, like, every kind of car, like, the cheesiest, like, dumpiest little car I could make fun. And I also love Ferraris and, the most expensive or the cheesiest, dumpiest cars. It's like I can find a way to like appreciate all of them because I just love cars. And it's like the same with films. It's like I just love films so much that it's rare that I find a film that I can't get like some kind of enjoyment out of. So it's like whether it's like super cheesy like 80s horror B movie or like like you name it, like any genre of film, any like kind of B films, C films, like just whatever, teen comedies, like masterpieces, whatever. I can't even think of it. Just so many different types. So my point is, I'm like playing around with the idea of possibly bringing to the table some films that might fall a little bit out of, this like upper echelon of film that we've been, mostly for the most part, I think, kind of films that are definitely kind of universally or closely universally considered classic, except for At Close Range, which was one of mine. So I don't know. How do you feel about that?
I think that'd be really interesting.
You open? You open to potentially like doing some genre films or some things that like aren't necessarily considered masterpieces? Okay, I'll think about it. We'll see.
That's I've got my next few picks kind of like laid out, and
man,
I won't spoil it, but
don't spoil it. You're on top of it. Whoa. Okay. All right. Well, there's so many good films out there, and that's the other thing. Life is too short. I wish that we lived 1,000 years so that I could absorb, 1,000 times more films.
Well, what's nice about doing this too is that it keeps me, I haven't been able to like sit down and watch a lot of movies lately.
Yeah.
And yet this is great because it it forces me to sit down and watch something every once in a while. So
good. All right, well, fantastic. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks, Cullen. We'll say goodbye for now, and until next time, we'll see you guys on the flip side.
Bye-bye.